Time for another look at Eye on the Issues. Joining me now is Anne Hassel. Anne, thank you for taking time to talk to us. And today, the issue we're talking about, of course, is people getting involved in drugs, marijuana specifically. And then, of course, we can talk about some other things. But can you kind of just paint a picture as to where you are right now? And then we're going to take some major steps back and figure out how you got to where you are right now.
Well, Mike, I am a physical therapist. I was a licensed physical therapist in Massachusetts before I went to work in a Massachusetts medical marijuana dispensary for a year and a half. And after I worked in the marijuana industry, I had a completely different outlook on marijuana.
So let's talk about, how did you get involved with using marijuana to begin with? What age? Where were you? What part of it? Where were you in life?
Well, I still remember it. I was 16 years old. I felt really kind of awkward, as a lot of teenagers do. I had a dysfunctional family and I just wasn't happy. I remember I met a girl and she was new to the school, new to town, and she invited me over to her and her mother's house and we smoked marijuana. And I remembered I felt really good. I felt set free from all the negative feelings. I felt like the best I felt in my life when I consumed again about a bowl of marijuana.
And so did you share that experience with your parents, no siblings, anything like that? Or who did you share that with, if anybody?
Well, but I was a little suspicious. I remember my sister noticed I laughed all the way through dinner. So I definitely was coming across as stoned, but my parents, they were religious. They didn't know anything about drugs. They didn't do alcohol. I remember my sisters tried to have a kind of intervention, like, we don't think this is good for you. Marijuana is bad for the brain. I was 16 and I just didn't want to listen to them whatsoever. I felt like I was getting a job. I was heading out on my own. My grades didn't drop. I did well in school, Mike. And I thought, hey, that'll be a warning sign if my grades drop.
So
So,
go ahead.
so I did get some warning at the time, but I completely discounted all of it.
And what was the warning you got? Do you remember?
I remember my sister saying it's not a good idea, but it led to me later. Marijuana was expensive. I'm back in the 80s doing this. It was expensive, hard to come by, and you're in some bad circumstances. So I decided to grow my own in college, and I got arrested with a very small grow in my closet. And I was facing 5 to 25 years, a 5 year mandatory minimum at the age of 20. And you would think I would go through that and still think that marijuana was something I should be concerned about and impacting my life. But I actually got on probation. I served a month in jail and I was very resentful about that. And then did probation and moved on and couldn't wait until I could again consume marijuana.
Well, let me ask you a question. How did you get caught? Who turned you in? How did they find out about you growing marijuana?
Well, my boyfriend and I had two small indoor grow units called phototrons. They were at his apartment, but he had to move them. So I had gotten a new apartment. I'd only been there a week or two, and the landlord went in. So that was the circumstance of the landlord discovered it, and it was a 5 year. If you were growing one plant in Virginia at the time during the war on drugs, it was a felony.
And what year was this?
1988.
Okay. And now you only ended up going to jail for 1 month. How did that happen? What was your sentence? It's probably more than a month.
Well, I pled no contest. I couldn't believe they were going to take me then and there to jail because I was told, I had no parking ticket. I had nothing criminal or anything like that in my life. And they wanted to have me served in prison or jail closer to home. It didn't work out. But what happened was the district attorney eventually, when we came back to court, he felt sorry for me because I was a student. I was 20 years old with no criminal history. So he decided to take it easy on me. Because at that point, I had the 5 years. There was no doubt about it. 5 years on my head in the state
And
pen.
wow. And so you got out after a month, and what happened? What'd you do next?
I moved back home with my parents. I got a degree in political science from Virginia Commonwealth University. I worked full time. I got a 4.0 GPA, and I went back to court to have the felony expunged from my record.
Did you get it done?
Well, I had thought all these years, 30 years later, I found out that it was never expunged from my record. And I need to pursue that because that's something where I was told there would be nothing on my record because I was trying to get a license to carry. And after 30 years, I realized, okay, now I'm a convicted felon drug, you know, a drug user,
Hmm.
and I cannot can carry at this point. So I need to pursue that. I need to file. I have my court records that say it's been expunged.
Huh. Interesting. So at some point you got back into the business. Talk to us about where you went from there.
Absolutely. Well, I was with a boyfriend I mentioned before. He left town and fled town. After I was off probation, I joined him in Massachusetts. And there I started consuming marijuana again. But I have to say, I remember consuming it when I was younger. It was probably 3 to 5% THC. The stuff I had in Boston was probably 10% plus. That was in the 90s when they started to hybridize the plant to make it really high in THC. And I remember
Right.
I felt awful consuming it. I really thought it reminded me of a bad acid trip. I wasn't sure what was going on, but people said, "Don't worry, Anne, you'll get used to it." And I did. So I continued to consume and I actually grew. I successfully did indoor and outdoor hydroponic, aeroponic, and other systems. And so I also went back and got a physical therapy degree because I wanted to help people. In the back of my mind, Mike, I kept thinking medical marijuana is helpful to people. It's a
Sure.
therapeutic plant. It was meant to help people. So I jumped at the chance to go work in the green rush as a bud tender back in 2015. I was very
Mhm.
excited and quite passionate about it.
So how did you get to where you are right now? And before you tell us where you are right now, tell us what is your attitude toward marijuana at this very moment?
Well, it was an evolutionary process. Again, I was a very passionate person. I do not use marijuana. I do not like to be around marijuana. I believe there is a harm to it that is not being recognized. Unfortunately, everywhere in Massachusetts you go, it permeates the air. People gush about it. People who used to not use marijuana in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, they're all using it now, thinking it's helping them. I know the negative harms I sustained mentally and physically. And people don't understand the deception of the industrialized, commercialized marijuana industry. I should have known that that was what it would be about, but I didn't understand they would be willing to harm people. So the fact is, I went to work in the industry and I noticed the harm that was occurring to people. There is contamination happening all across the state. I thought Massachusetts can regulate things properly. It doesn't. No state can really regulate marijuana, Mike. So
Mhm.
I actually was heavy metal poisoned because what you have happening is the use of pesticides, fungicides, and plant growth regulators, and there's not enough testing. So I was heavy metal poisoned with multiple heavy metals. I I had treatment for that, which is great, but I also sustained worse than being heavy metal poisoned was the cannabis use disorder and the cannabis induced psychosis. I was having psychosis, Mike, seeing things that weren't there, having violent thoughts, wanting to end my life. I was very fortunate that that didn't happen, that I was able to wake up and recover because many people don't, Mike.
How many years ago did you wake up?
I quit working in the dispensary in March of 2017. And for about a year, I kept thinking when I quit, everyone knew I was all about marijuana or cannabis. And my friends said, "Ann, just do a craft grow, get back into it." I did not like the effect upon me. Whenever I consumed it again, I had the paranoia. Also, I just felt off mentally. But I came to learn when I stopped using marijuana and read about the actual research that there are definite physical and mental harms that are scientifically proven that I was not aware of. So I have stopped using it.
So right now, of course, lots of states are moving in the direction of legalizing marijuana. Typically, it happens first from a medical standpoint, then it goes to recreational. Colorado, one state that's been legalized both for over a decade or so. What's your advice to people in states that haven't legalized it yet, like Wyoming, for example? What do you want to tell them about what you know and what they really need to understand about marijuana before they make what could be a bad decision and legalize it?
Well, Director of Normal, which is the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, Kenneth Stroop, he once said they would use medical marijuana as a red herring to give marijuana a good name. Well, that just says it all right there. That was what he said. And I feel like they're playing on people's sympathies. They're saying, oh, the people with the seizures or the people, we were doing this because we want to be compassionate. And then they're cracking that door open for medical, and then you get bum rushed by commercialization. What the marijuana industry wants, like down in Florida, they just spent 34 million just through Trulieve, is to have recreational. They want to mass produce it like cigarettes. And the first step for that is with medical. So I
And
would
so,
advise if Wyoming can avoid it. I read that you don't have medical or recreational marijuana. You're also a small state that doesn't have a big well, you don't have a big population. So I don't think that the industry is going to target you as much as, let's say, Florida or the Eastern Seaboard.
yeah, good, very good point. So let's talk for a second about what the difference is between today's marijuana. And I think this is a huge point because people that, let's say, for example, smoked a couple of joints 30 years ago versus people that are doing the same thing right now, there's a big difference because of the potency. You mentioned it briefly, but can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, like I said, back in the 80s, I was smoking maybe 3% in the 90s. What the seed banks did was increase the THC, that's the psychoactive effect, and decrease the CBD that kind of prevents the high from taking effect. So you had these strains of flower that became stronger and stronger, which my dispensary opened up with 34% face rec on its menu. What I didn't understand, because I had seen the moldy marijuana when I went to the cultivation center and at my dispensary, I just thought this is not good for me to consume. So when our corporate consultant said that concentrates are a more medicinal way to medicate, I didn't know what the concentrates were. I mean, this was 2015. I had never heard of concentrates. And that's when they take the cannabis plant and use a stripping agent like butane or propane. And instead of having any of the vegetative material, you just have the crystals, the actual cannabinoids, high THC. So I was dabbing for the first time a concentrate that was like 98% THC. You take a little tiny amount and you take looks like a bong, but it's called a dab rig, and you then take a hit and it's tremendous. It, like when I did a hit of that, it's like it flooded all the receptors of my brain. I've never been high as before, and I had done cocaine in college, by the way, and didn't go that way because I knew that was harmful. But when I did that dab hit in 2016, it was powerful. It sucked me in and I began consuming more and more. And that's the danger. People think they're voting for grandma's weed, 3%, some little strain. No, it's all about these high THC concentrates, which they then put into edibles and vape cartridges. And again, the pretty hardcore way I consumed was with the dab rig and the butane torch.
So what are the side effects and the long-term effects that people need to know about before, let's say people are watching this, they've never tried marijuana before. This super potent marijuana is out there now in some states, legalized in many. What do people need to know? What could be the long-term effects of smoking or using marijuana in some form?
What I think is really sad is people are being duped. They're being told this is a medicine. If you go to a doctor, they never tell you what to consume. They count on the budtender, someone like me, to tell you what to consume. And I would care enough to notice if someone was inexperienced, but other younger people than me would give people high potency marijuana, which was not what they should have been recommended. And there are physical and mental effects. That is undeniable. People know that it affects the mind. That's why people find it enjoyable. But there's always going to be a price to pay with it. That price to pay is addiction and also bad mental health effects. It can be just amotivational syndrome where, let's say, a young person doesn't feel like doing much. That's amotivational syndrome. But also, what was even worse for me was that psychosis, where I was having these bizarre daydreams. I would do a dab hit mic on my friend's sofa, and my eyes would roll up in the back of my head, and I would pass out and be out for a while. And I was having these vivid daydreams of committing violent acts. which were so disturbing. First, I thought about beating people with a baseball bat and stabbing people and shooting people. And I was fortunate to have been a middle-aged woman with a fully developed frontal lobe and no access to firearms because you know what? The media is not showing the connection. You are having people on drugs in psychosis committing shootings. That is well documented. I don't know whether you have touched on that in other shows.
Question, why are we not hearing more about that? I'm sure what you're saying is accurate.
Well, the Secret Service did do a report on that showing the connection. The fact is, it's a big cash cow and it's a popular cause these days. So politicians don't want to upset what they think is what people want, but I don't think people are aware of what this is. They're not sure what this is. They think they understand it and they're being marketed to. Think of all these billion-dollar corporations. They are marketing, they are swaying people. It happened before with alcohol and tobacco. Doctors say this, doctors recommend alcohol, doctors recommend tobacco. And right now we're like, how could humans have done that? Well, we're doing the exact same thing with marijuana.
So your advice to, for example, a state like Wyoming, where it's not legal in any form at this point, if you were going to say, you know what, before you do anything, read this or watch that stuff, check that, what do you recommend they do so that the people of Wyoming understand what could be the result of legalizing?
I was in a movie Smokescreen. I don't know whether you can have your audience view that. It was created by Idaho at one point. There is a version that shows the beautiful Idaho countryside, but they made a generic version. There's also information on Every Brain Matters. That's a site dedicated to telling parents and just young people and anyone about the harms of marijuana. There's also Americans Against Legalizing Marijuana. They are a website. They are a nonprofit. They're attempting to educate, but what we find is that our message is not being heard. One day it will be heard, Mike. I don't know, again, the amount of damage that will have to happen, but people need to educate themselves. And also there's a website, Isaac. It's a doctor's cannabis, about the cannabis effects. It's called Isaac, and Dr. Ken Finn is someone.
Okay.
And they have a whole library. If you want to put in, okay, they have a whole library and every single thing there, unlike the marijuana industry and the promotion and the propaganda, will give you a actual study, a good study and showing the effects, because people can play on and on about what they think the positives are, but they're not showing actual evidence of the positives of marijuana.
Right. Talking about the violence that could be a result, we've obviously had a lot of mass shootings in this country. Do you think there's a correlation there?
There is a correlation. Alec Berenson wrote this book, Tell Your Children, and he noticed, he was a New York Times reporter, and he noticed his wife would come home working with really mentally disturbed young people or just adults and say, there's a correlation between marijuana. And he didn't want to look at it, but he did a book on that. It is known, it's been known throughout human history that there have been what they call the so-called reefer madness, but there is a kernel of truth in that. And I was someone who didn't trust the government. I thought the government had it wrong. The government does have it right, but I'm afraid the government is going to change and support people more and more marijuana. More and more, look at California, you have more and more criminal activity. You also have Chinese cartel grows. We had 8 of them in Western Massachusetts. There's something wrong. Legalization of marijuana is not going to reduce the crime. And now in California, they want to get rid of all the taxes. So what about the bait and switch? Legalize marijuana. There'll be a tax resource, and then they want to take it away.
And then nationalization, they're talking about, of course, on Capitol Hill, talking about trying to legalize it from a national standpoint. So, clearly they don't get the message.
My issue is that it shouldn't even be political, but I feel like you have Democrats and Republicans. You have Fetterman, you have Schumer, but on the Republican side, you have Matt Gaetz and you have Nancy Mace. And I think that they really need to look more at this. They are just getting caught up in the gusto of maybe they've used marijuana. Maybe, I don't know whether politicians have friends that have influenced them, but the politicians are failing us. But I understand the politicians don't want to do anything unpopular because that's how you get voted out. But there's error on both sides. And I am definitely not happy with what I'm seeing. it's like the politicians only care about the profits of the industry and keeping their votes, and they don't care about the health of the American people. That's gone out the window.
Lobbyists obviously have a lot of sway in Washington, and I would imagine the lobbyists from this industry have a lot of sway there. Let me ask you this. In terms of marijuana being some people consider it a gateway drug, meaning leading to the use of other drugs. Was it like that for you at all?
Absolutely. I've heard someone say, I know in this whole effort, that marijuana is not just a gateway drug, it's a speedway drug. So I started using marijuana, and then you're a kid, you're hanging out with other people. Then I started using magic mushrooms, which are really in the press a lot these days. LSD, cocaine. I was in college and I was reading these books that were extolling the virtues of drug usage. It's like what happened in the 60s is happening again. Open up your mind, turn on, tune in, turn off, or that whole philosophy is coming back. So I did go into other, again, like I said, cocaine. I never got addicted to them. I kind of just used them in college,
Mhm.
and just stuck with marijuana.
So let me ask you: the states that have legalized it, let's use Colorado for an example. It's been over a decade or thereabouts. Are they down the slippery slope and it's gone and there's no way to backtrack that up the hill, or what do you suggest? Because clearly, I've interviewed a number of doctors from Colorado, and I know the fallout from the legalization of marijuana has not treated their young people well.
Well, people are waking up because unfortunately, the young people affected, it goes beyond politics. You have, again, a very much a democratic state of Colorado, but there is blue rising together. And they actually are trying to put a limit on the potency and reduce people under 18 having access to all this, again, the concentrate, the high potency THC concentrate. So there is hope because they're trying to do something, but I wish that different groups could work together. I feel like there's too much division. It's the politics. I think it's going to be very hard at this point. All we can do is try and educate and roll back some of those laws to make it safer. I don't know if we can put the genie back in the bottle. I've been told there's no way that's going to happen.
Mhm. And in respect to moving forward with your life here, clearly you're going to be an outspoken educator, I would gather, when it comes to marijuana. In what other ways has the use of marijuana changed your life, for the good or for the bad?
Well, I think that in a way it kind of stultified my growth. I think I look and think maybe I could have done more in terms of achievements and maybe not being as serious because, even now I have some friends there in their 50s and 60s, and they're just like, let's get stoned. So instead of really doing something productive, they're sitting, consuming marijuana. I stopped doing that. I thought I was happy on marijuana, but I realized that I was not happy. Again, it's a substance that can influence your mind. I think true happiness comes from not being on drugs. And I'm just really worried about our country. We're heading off the cliff. We're heading off the cliff. More and more people are saying the issue is we need to have more magic mushrooms or marijuana. Or if you look what happened in Colorado, no, excuse me, Oregon, they legalized drugs. Now they had a majority of the people want to turn that back because it's really caused their quality of life to decrease. And what the heck? What message are we giving to our children here, Mike?
Very good point, Anne. So is there anything I'm not at? I mean, I'm sure there's plenty, but there's something that I haven't talked to you about right now in respect to this that you would like to share. There's something that I might have missed.
Well, in terms of the industry, I'm not some lone person who has observed this. I'm one of the rare people maybe who stopped using it, and I'm trying to speak out. But you have a lot of cannabis workers. One was killed from cannabis dust in Massachusetts, and Lorna McMurray, and she was 27 years old. And another woman was just killed at Green Thumb Industries last week. You have a volatile substance, and you have OSHA, which I could go on and on forever about my report to OSHA, but they're not safeguarding the people. So these jobs are dangerous to people. And because it's not federally legal, but it's legal in the state, there's a big crack. So big marijuana, the commercialized, industrialized marijuana industry is taking advantage of that and harming people. And I really give credit whenever I see cannabis workers coming forward. I'm like, please try, but they're being drowned out because you just have a greedy multi-billion-dollar industry that doesn't care about human life, doesn't care about health, and doesn't care about the carnage. We're just collateral damage.
Now, if somebody wanted to see more about you and what you've had to say about this industry, I know you've got a YouTube video. Where can people find that? What should they do to search for that?
Well, that's a good question. I really should be better. I'm very low tech. I don't have even a website. I don't even do Twitter. I'm not into that. But I I think if they type in smokescreen the movie, maybe that will come up. It's free. The people really want for it to get out. I'm
Mhm.
also in this book by Kevin Sabet. He was at one point on the drug policy White House staff, um, called Marijuana What the Smokescreen, What the Marijuana Industry Does Not Want You to Know.
Mhm.
So that is a source there. Otherwise, I'm kind of been at this like in a lone wolf type of way. I
Mhm.
for so long, for years, no one would talk to me. I would reach out to countless people. And the only person who wrote about me was a cannabis activist in my state. So that gave me a little bit of believability because this again is a known fact that's happening. And you can actually deny the truth, but the truth will come out, Mike.
Sure, sure. And I can't thank you enough for your time. We really appreciate what you had to share with our audience.
Well, I thank you for having me, Mike. And I think the people of Wyoming, don't get on the bandwagon. You got to think about what you want that's important for your state. And it's not to follow what's happened. Please look at Colorado and see the negativity in California. You don't want to be like that. And even in my own state, I feel like I don't know if things will get better, but the thing is not to start down that road, to try and be firm and value your family and your health and your lives.
Good advice, Ann. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Mike.